Good morning to you all. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I feel really privileged to be the youngest speaker, by far. I don't think both...
and not a Gupta.
Oh, yes. But if you're a Gupta, at least you are going to give us something. I think both Monesh and Alex are even far older than my own parents. So I feel quite privileged. But thank you so much to the organizers, to Mr. Brian Moy, and the whole team that he's working with, and to the Johannesburg Catholic Justice and Peace Ministry. And thank you to all of you for making this event possible and making it a success. So I don't seemingly have a lot of time, and I'm going to try my best to save the time that we have, but I want to look into what I've been requested to speak on, which is ethical leadership, and more particular, ethical leadership in government and or among government employees. So I actually chose to tackle this topic seemingly from an unexpected paradigm or perspective, and I hope you'll bear with me. But let me begin with two wise words that we get from King Solomon. He says, if a king is corrupt, then the whole nation will be corrupt. If a king is corrupt, then the whole nation will be corrupt. And King Solomon makes the statement in an absolute fashion. He doesn't say maybe if a king is corrupt, then maybe the whole nation is corrupt. He says it authoritatively and absolutely. And again in Ecclesiastes 7, he says, extortation turns a wise man into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Extortion turns a wise man into a fool, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Maybe we get our jobs because of the wisdom that God has given us, but yielding seemingly to corruption will then turn us, according to Solomon, into fools, and will also then end up with corrupt hearts. So the subject is an important one, and I thank the organizers for this engagement. I want to look at this topic from this perspective. I want to look at it from a perspective of living in times of interregnum. Now I'll explain myself. Living in times of interregnum, and I'm particularly going to paraphrase much of the conceptual framework from the work of the Emeritus Professor of Sociology, Zygmunt Bauman, and I think it will assist us in dealing with the problem of unethical leadership, as it were, not only in government but broadly in society, but obviously with the paradigm that we are given by Solomon, that if the king is corrupt, then the whole nation is corrupt. So it means that corruption begins in that high office. So let me begin maybe by explaining where the concept of interregnum comes from. The concept of interregnum comes with our understanding of Greek history, and the Roman, obviously the Greek Empire obviously was then overtaken by the Roman Empire, and Rome does not, as it were, have its own culture, and they just adopted the Greek culture. So we have in Roman history where the first king lived for, or was king rather, for a period of 37 years. And being king for a period of 37 years at that time, the Roman historians say that the average lifespan of people in the empire was 37 years. So what seemingly then happened is there was among the people, after the death of the first king, which is Ramarumus, what happens is that for the first time, the people get into a place where they call interregnum, a place in which people seemingly don't know what should happen going forward. People have an understanding of what was. There was a former leader who seemingly had the authority to make all the decisions, and as he dies, we then have to get into a panic mode to decide what actually happens in this particular period. And he then terms that period interregnum. But then it is later on the Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci who then adopts the concept of interregnum and brings it more to a contemporary understanding of the term. And this is where I'm speaking from. Antonio Gramsci teaches interregnum as the idea that we now live in a period where the old ways seemingly no longer work, but the new ways have not been created yet. So we have a period in which we have problems that we seemingly have no solutions to. But nonetheless, day-to-day life has to continue. And that period is what we call interregnum. When we put in place new solutions, then we're no longer in a space of interregnum. And I suggest to you, colleagues, that me and you today are living in a time of interregnum. And as we seek to address this topic on ethical leadership, I want us to actually just really consider the problem of unethical leadership, and obviously that will give us some footing or a framework around which we could then be able to seek to address how can we possibly come up with solutions to this problem. So I'm going to start this discussion from the 1755 earthquake that happened in Lisbon. And in 1755, there was a great earthquake in Lisbon. Lisbon at the time was a leader of culture, industry, and wealth in Europe. And with that being the case, the earthquake started. And after the earthquake, due to the tremor, there was then a great fire within the city. And after the fire, there was also what we will call in modern day society a tsunami. So over a period of few days, the whole city of Lisbon was seemingly destroyed. And in that period, then there was the question among the leading philosophers of the time, such as Voltaire, like Rousseau. They then had the question: what should we make up of this? What does this actually mean? And with time, then they came with the conclusion that seemingly the way in which the world is led, either through natural or through divine leadership, the world is not functioning properly any longer through the various kind of leadership that it has. So what needs to happen? We have to come up with a new form or system of leadership globally, which would then be the institutionalized way of leading the world. Man has to lead the world through reason, because part of what these philosophers observed is that seemingly when there are such disasters, they are morally blind. They do not choose whether it's righteous people or unrighteous people. As King Solomon again taught us, he says, the same fate happens to them all. Right? And now, essentially, when these philosophers get to this conclusion, there then becomes a whole new framework of society, or at least the conception of society. We had at that time what we will say is the divine right of the kings. And at that time, that was questioned with then this whole approach to what we will say is the enthronement of reason. And once reason is enthroned, we then have, in a sense, a questioning within the broader European society, a questioning of the structures around which the countries, the various countries were actually led. And this obviously, history teaches us that this actually then led to what you will say is the 18th century Renaissance. And the 18th century Renaissance, as it were, led to, in a sense, the Industrial Revolution, which resulted in the capitalist system or the capitalist framework around which me and you have to operate. So this then becomes the context, the questioning of whether it's moral, whether it's natural or divine leadership, me and you will obviously say that it is divine leadership. It seemingly was questioned by those who were in leadership positions at the time to say that this does not work. It becomes the framework around which we find our reality, because we live in a capitalist, not only in our region, but we living in a geo-capitalist environment, global capitalism. So, with this being the case, we then have to look into the question of morality, from this particular framework. What is the proper relationship between capitalism and morality? And as it were, there is a great questioning. Some people will say that capitalism, such as some of the philosophers of the past will say that capitalism thrives on corruption. Capitalism thrives on corruption. And if that is the case, then it means that we are, again, in a place of interregnum, where we are living within a seemingly corrupt society as a result of the structure of society. We have not as yet created a new form of governance or leadership which would allow us as a society to have a mass moral approach to leadership, ethical leadership. And I want us to look into some of the implications of this, and I'm going to then look into the structure of power or dominion in the world as a result of the framework that I've already spoken about. And I want us to look particularly to answering the question, what makes us, and I'm not talking about me and you in the room, but I'm talking about us as leaders in the world, not only in this room, but as leaders in the world. What makes us do what we do? What makes us do what is it about us as leaders that makes us seemingly to become enticed or to become seduced or to become coerced towards becoming corrupt, towards becoming unethical as leaders? What is the actual problem here? And in this respect, I'm going to go back to a major debate that was taking place in sociology, with Jeremy Bentham coming with a concept that he called panoptical view of domination, and it was then later on adopted by Michel Foucault, who then gives us a framework around which to work with this concept. So basically what the argument here is, panoptic is an architectural solution to all problems of dominion. And panoptic is very, very, very prevalent in the world today, but I'll explain. It's very prevalent in the world today. We are all subjected to panoptic form of leadership in some or other instance. And certainly what happens is that we have in this concept when many people are being watched by few people. And this obviously was precipitated by what we will say is the managerial revolution. The managerial revolution, where you have a structure of managers watching the subordinates, and obviously subordinates are more than managers, and with that being the case, you have many people being watched by few people. And the problem with this, obviously, is the same thing which Solomon taught us, that if the king is corrupt, the whole nation is corrupt. In this respect, in panoptic, if the few that are watching the many are corrupt, then the many that are being watched will also be corrupt. So this is when a whole institution is made to be corrupt because of the corruption of few that are in positions of dominion or authority. And that's also very important for our understanding, because when we get into organizations and we try to analyze, why is this organization so corrupt? For an example, if you were to ask the question, why is the South African government so corrupt? Then essentially what you will have to look into is the structure of dominion. And again, If the king is corrupt, the whole nation is corrupt. I'm not saying that our king is corrupt. That is what the media says. I do not know. But with that being the case, I think the central point here is that if the many that are being watched by the few, if the few that are watching the many are corrupt, then they will essentially influence the many to also be corrupt. That's the central point. But then we move on in the arguments of political scientists with an argument made by Thomas Machiasen, and he's coming with a concept of what he calls synoptic. Synoptic is the inverse, as it were, of panoptic. Panoptic, like I said, is where the many are being watched by the few. But now with the introduction, historical introduction, let me make a disclaimer. When I was invited, I asked what language should I use, and the language that I was given was English. He's saying the jargon, I can't even translate it to Sesotho. And that is actually not my problem, it's bigger than me. Sesotho does not have panoptic, for an example. Okay, that's fine. Let me try my best, but we'll see how far I can go with that. So, we've got panoptic. And panoptic is the many being watched by the few.
Sorry, don't you want to just summarize in the vernacular what you said?
Yeah, I'm going to try my best. I'm a good Sotho speaker, by the way. Ke Mosotho nna. Ebile ha ebe ke teng, ko go ka utlwa le Sesotho sa ka go ke se dutseng fatshe. Empa I was instructed to speak in English and I prepared my talk in English. Please understand and bear with me in this particular situation. But nonetheless, I'm going to try my best to accommodate Batho ba baholo. So let me just try to continue. So Thomas Machiasen is a Danish political scientist. He comes with the concept of synoptic. Synoptic is based on the fundamental concept of the few being watched by the many. In panoptic, we have the many being watched by the few. In synoptic, we have the few being watched by the many. And in this respect, what seemingly happens is there's a different form of domination. So, from the panoptic, you have through coercion and force, managers, top-down approach. They say, this is what needs to happen, and this is how you will do it. That is panoptic. Synoptic is when the many are watching the few. And how does this happen? It happens through TV. It happens through social media. When we are browsing and we are looking at Beyonce there, or we are looking, I don't know who older people like you look at on TV. And you are looking there and you are trying to model yourself, model your behavior around what you see on mass media. And in this respect, we have a few celebrities, a few powerful people, whether when we are in politics, when we are in government, in positions of leadership, we've got a few people that are leading us whom we seemingly seek to emulate towards. In my leadership approach, I want to be like, and essentially that's why I'm with Ausdipo and she's working with the public protector. You know that we had a superstar public protector. Metulima Donzela was a superstar, international superstar. And it's the first time we have managers being superstars, for an example. But this is the effect of synoptic. It's the effect of essentially through mass media, a platform for the first time in history where the few can watch the many. And with this being the case, again, the same problem is what we are subjected to. If the few become corrupt, then what happens? If the king is corrupt, the whole nation. If the few are corrupt, whom we are looking to, whom we are emulating, trying to become the models around which we are focusing our action, then we will be subjected to the same problem of corruption. Why are we doing what we are doing? Because we have seen, either in this case, the many that were watching us, the few that were watching us, or in the synoptic case, the few that we were watching, but nonetheless, we have seen people in positions or in positions of authority being corrupt, being unethical in their leadership, and we have adopted that. Maybe I got into local government when I was younger, and there was some senior manager at that time who was corrupt. And what did he teach me? Corruption. What do I know? Corruption. Right? So it's that concept of needing to unlearn some of the things that we have unlearned. But what happens in that space? Before I unlearn them, I'm in a position of interregnum. We have not created the new solutions. We are stuck in the old ways, but we already know that they don't work. Then what do? We have an intellectual conundrum. It's an expert problem. It's an expert problem. And that is essentially what I want to submit to you. I'm not submitting a solution, but I want to submit that our problem is sometimes even bigger than the way we've conceptualized it. We've just said, no, but that person has to change, without actually trying to understand why is that person doing what he's doing in the first place. What is it about our society that has created that particular kind of behavior within that person? Why is this institution seemingly so corrupt? And me and you are government people, but there's also someone here who's private and is acting all moral and acting all better than us. And then a report comes out and says ABSA and Standard Bank and this and that were actually fixing prices. What is this?
It means everybody is corrupt.
It means everybody is corrupt. Yeah. Who taught us corruption? The few that have authority. And in this regard, and this will also be my conclusion to respect time. Let me make this my conclusion to respect time. In this regard, me and you are those people in authority. Me and you are those people in authority. And for the first time in history, the history of the world, even more, I suspect, than at the time when Solomon stated it, we have the greatest responsibility as leaders. 21st century leadership is the greatest degree of leadership demand on any generation that has ever existed, because of the complexities of our times, because of the problems that we face. We are seemingly in a time of interregnum in so many issues, not only in corruption. And with that being the case, we need wise leaders who will then be able to guide society. And in this respect, my conclusion to you is that with me and you being the leaders that are in place, we have an opportunity, we have a moral obligation, we have seemingly also an obligation that we will say is a divine obligation, because God institutionalized leadership, and with institutionalizing leadership, God essentially is the one that has put me and you in positions of leadership and authority. That's why those who are leaders, such as myself and yourself, will be judged because of whatever position of authority that we held. What happens if I taught people to be corrupt? I was the author of corruption. and I teach a whole generation of leaders to be corrupt. And I'm saying to you, I'm even saying it to myself, that me and you can make a change. We can choose to say that we have a problem, but we can change our minds. And with changing our minds, we then have the possibility to also then influence a whole line or a whole chain reaction of leaders that will become ethical. I suspect that is the premise from which we have to approach ethical leadership. If a king is corrupt, the whole nation is corrupt. It also means that if a king is righteous, then the whole nation will be righteous. Government can be righteous if me and you were to uphold principles of ethical leadership. We don't all need to learn again the principles. We don't need to say, no, let us be honest. We know that. We know that. The issue is implementation, and sometimes it means we have to fight against the current. Because the current status quo says, no, but we are corrupt here. You know how we do things. But we have to put our feet down and say, no, we are seeking to create a new movement, a new moral, framework within this institution that we seek to have this to become our legacy. Dr. John C. Maxwell talks about the law of legacy. Let's maybe start thinking about leaving a legacy of ethical leadership. This is a responsibility that each and every one of us has, and it will make us unpopular. Sometimes it will even threaten our lives, but it is certainly something worth pursuing, something we have to rally our actions, our thoughts behind, and certainly it is our God-given mandate. With that, thank you so much.